Hello and welcome to Hidden Existence. I hope you're all doing all right all out there in lockdown land. My guest tonight is not just an artist, he's into archaeology, cryptozoology, ufology, astronomy, probably lots of other ologies we'll get into. I'm not sure.
And apparently catology. My cat's
Catology.
she's nibbling on me now.
He's the creator of the Society for the Investigation of Research of the Unexplained, and it is Jason Mclean. Thank you, Jason, for being here tonight.
Hey, Danielle, it's my personal pleasure. It's a real honor to come on the show.
That's great. Let's start with at the beginning, the interest in the unexplained.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I've always I've always been into it, right? My father was a mechanic, just outside of Dallas, Texas, and where I grew up, small town called DeSoto. We're a suburb of Dallas, actually. And he was the one who always said, "You can believe anything you want, but you have to be able to prove it to me. You need to be able to show me the work, show me the argument." So he was very big on understanding, reading, and he's like the world. He had enough sort of go on in his own life where he's like the world is always bigger than you think it is, and so he always wanted. So I was into it from the word go. He's the one who got me hooked on the comic books and so in sci-fi and all of it. So I was always very interested in it, but I think the thing that changed my life, and I didn't even realize how much or how profoundly it had affected my life, was until very, very recently. Was I was 12. I was fishing with a friend of mine in 10 Mile Creek. It's a little tributary off of the Trinity, which is like the main artery in North Texas. Pretty much all life exists in North Texas because of the Trinity River. And it's just a little tributary off of it. Well, the thing is, it's DeSoto and most of North Texas is on top of a very large, just slab of limestone, right? Very shallow soil. So it's great for things like cotton and wheat, but not really good for trees. So, the thing is, though, the creeks will tend to cut very deeply into it. So you've got 15-foot high walls. And then what plant life there is sort of, on either side of that creek. So it's very hard to see in them unless you're inside. Well, there was this part where the wall had actually sort of collapsed in on itself and made a little bank, and you could fish from there. You didn't get much but like carp and some bluegill. They're little fish. But we'd finished fishing, and he'd packed up. He was already up the embankment, and I was just getting inside the tree line when I heard a very odd noise. Like it was a call of a bird, but at least what sounded like a bird, but I had never heard anything like it. It sounded like a very ugly crow, like the caw of a crow, just louder and almost just ugly. It's the only word I have for it. So I stop and I'm like, I've never heard anything like that in my life. I stop and I poke my head out. And so I'm in like the straightaway. It's sort of, the 10 Mile Creek snakes its way through Duncanville, DeSoto, Lancaster, Wilmer Hutchins, and then joins up at the Trinity. Well, I'm at, so it's very windy, except for this one little area where we're at. And I see what comes from behind the curve. What I think is the largest blue heron I've ever seen in my life. A blue heron, for those who aren't aware, I know we're international here. It's like a crane, right? It's just sort of a bluish gray, like a Payne's gray, right? Nothing too spectacular. They keep they do that sort of S-curve thing with their neck where they just sort of double it, and they stick their legs out from behind them. So I'm used.
They kind of look prehistoric when they're flying, don't they?
They do, yeah. So imagine like a pelican, but with these very long legs sticking out behind it. It's just Payne's gray. That's what a blue heron looks like, and I've seen them my entire life. We have all kinds of cranes around here. We call smaller white ones we call egrets or cowbirds. They just hang out with the cows. Again, I live in Texas. I've seen a few of them. So I'm like, man, it's like it got an 8 to 10 foot wingspan because I can see it between either side of the walls. And I know how wide the creek is. So I'm like, this is it. Like I've never seen a blue heron this big, and then it's flying real low, and it gets in front of my face. The wingtip is less than 5 feet from my face.
Wow.
And that's when I realized I'm not looking at a blue heron because it has no feathers. And what I thought were its legs sticking out from behind it was actually a long flanged tail. And that's where I was like, what the heck? And I watch it, and it's as it's going away, and I get an even better look at it. It's sort of moving away. That it's the wings kind of look, again, sort of the overall shape is very heron like, but it's not a heron. It's wrong. And like I said, the legs were closer. What I thought was it was a tail that had like a triangular flange or diamond shaped flange at the end, and then it just banked and went away. Never saw anything like it again. My friend comes back down. He's like, "Dude, what's going on?" And he's like, what's wrong?" I'm like, "Did you just see that pterodactyl that flew past here?" And he laughs and he's like, "You're crazy. I'm gonna go eat the sandwiches," and leaves. And I'm like, and it just occurred to me, I can't tell anybody. What's weird is my father would have believed me, but I never told him. And I just sort of, it was there. And for over 20 years, even as I got into things like Sasquatch and, like I said, love the Loch Ness Monster, all this, but it's like the thing that stuck in my head was I live in Dallas, Texas, or just outside of Dallas, Texas. Those things don't live here. They live in the Congo. They live in some far off exotic location like England. Little wink there. I'm just saying, the Pacific Northwest. They don't live in Texas, and sure as the world don't live in that just outside of Dallas. This is one of the 7th largest conurbations in Texas, or in the world. Sorry, the United States. Sorry, I jumped from country to world somehow. This, over 7 million people live here. This is a big industrialized place. These creatures don't live here. And then it was just in my first really sort of foray into cryptozoology as far as writing was about the wyvern, which is, I would argue, is the rhamphorhactoid pterodactyl, which is what I saw. What I saw was a rhamphorhactoid pterodactyl. For those who aren't aware, most people are familiar with the pteranodon, right? Because again, that's what the Flintstones had. That's what Jurassic Park usually had. It's like that's the thing we're used to seeing. But the rhamphorhactoid species or family of pterosaurs were much smaller. Some had crests, some didn't. They have like the Dimorphodon that we saw in the last Jurassic or the first Jurassic World movie, right? Has a long tail with a flange in the end, but they've got larger heads. But long story short, the rhamphorhactoids basically, imagine a lizard with wings, right? Long lizard-like tail, but at the end you have a sort of a diamond-shaped flange. And then at the tip of their long face, there's like an extra tooth that comes out, make it look like a beak. That's what rhamphorhynchus means, is tooth-beaked. And so that's the basic family that this group of pterosaurs is coming from, right? Again, 8 to 10 feet in wingspan. Some people who have seen them, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rephrase that. So I go for a while, and I would argue that the wyvern is simply people seeing these rhamphorhactoids, right? We see them all throughout history. And the reason I would argue this is, again, as an artist, I originally was studying art history. I realized no one's going back and saying, the artists who are depicting dragons throughout history, they never saw them, right? They're going off what people are telling them they saw. Up until about the 15th century, there was a dragon that was killed in France. And I did a little research and I found 3 different art pieces that were done of a decayed wyvern skeleton. Now, it's about 200 years after the dragon had been killed and taken to Paris. So what we're looking at in those drawings was clearly what's called a gaff. It's when you sew together other animal parts to make something like a Fiji mermaid, right? But it was clearly based on something that had existed earlier because they didn't have a way of preserving, animals like we do now in formaldehyde. And when you look at these drawings, they all have a tooth at the end of the mouth, at the end of the snout. They have 1 pair of legs and 1 pair of wings, which is unusual for for depictions of dragons. The wings have 3 claws on them, where it is at the bend. It has a long tail, and it's from this period that what we consider a dragon tail, right, where it has, or even a demon's tail or whatever, where it has that triangle at the end. That's where it's in this time period that emerges in heraldry, in heraldic art. Sorry, let me phrase it. Sorry, it's been a long day. I'm not nearly caffeinated enough. It's spring in Texas, so it's absolutely gorgeous. But the ragweed is trying to murder my face.
Right. Okay.
So I'm highly medicated at the moment. So anyway, it's at this time that we see this tale show up in heraldic art. So you kind of put two and two together here. It's like, okay, so all the artwork of dragons prior to that, we have basically, you can tell they're going off of what people are telling them they look like, but they've never seen anything like it. And then we see these very specific features show up in artwork at this period. At the same time, this dragon had been killed and put on display in Paris. So you kind of put two and two together on that. And you're like, okay, so the wyvern is a real thing. It's just we call it a pterodactyl, or a pterosaur now. It's a rhamphoractoid pterosaur. So again, I kind of keep all that tucked in, but I still was telling myself I didn't see one because I couldn't have seen one because I live in Dallas. Lyle Blackburn puts on because I've known Lyle and Ken Gerhardt for years at this point, and it's like I knew that Ken Gerhardt, who is just he is the cryptozoologist I want to grow up and be, right? He'd written the book Big Bird. He had written about pterosaurs in Texas. And I'm like, but that's all down south. That's the Rio Grande Valley, which is a significant distance from Dallas. It's like it's really about a 7-hour drive to, straight shot down to that area. So I'm like, there's no way I saw one. It wasn't until Lyle was like, hey, we're doing a pilot for a show. If anyone's seen any swamp monsters, let me know. Right. For those of you who don't know, Ken Gerhardt and Lyle Blackburn, they're great cryptozoologists. And Lyle specifically, he's famous for the Falk monster, which is a Sasquatch in the Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas border area. And it was called Texarkana. And so I sort of do a little smart ass remark, and I'm like, hey, does a pterodactyl in a creek count? And he's like, hey, actually, we're doing an episode on pterodactyls in southern Oklahoma. And I'm like, whoa. What are you talking about? Long story short, I get to hear a bunch of these accounts, and they all describe the exact same creature I saw. 8 to 10 feet. Most of them, though, were red, sort of a reddish brown. One person did say it was like a gray. One person had a crest. The other one didn't. But everyone to the person said that they thought it was like a crane or a pelican at first. Then I started talking to some other people in the area, and a person who goes to my church saw one. I'm like, whoa, what? Why haven't you told anybody? She looked at me, she goes, would you? And I'm like, well, no, I didn't, because I saw one. I didn't tell anyone for 20 years. And there was another sighting by a trucker out in Fort Worth, just like 20 miles to the west of me. And I talked to a woman from Italy, Texas, which is 15 minutes from my house. It's technically Italy, but it's Texas, so we say Italy. And she had been coming up 35, and she and her daughter saw one about the same time of day that I had my encounter, but it flew into the same creek. She was just a couple miles removed from where I was, but it was a different, but we were almost 15, 17 years apart. So it became very clear to me that there are, these things are here, that they were living here. And as I got more into the community, I started realizing that there was no real Christian viewpoint to this, right? Which is why I created S.I.R.U. It's to publicly say, look, these creatures all exist, right? The supernatural things, the UFOs, the Bigfoot, the pterodactyls, they all exist. And there is a worldview, and they fit into a biblical worldview. A lot of people say, well, if dinosaurs are real and exist, then the Bible can't be real. Why? So I'm here. So I created S.I.R.U. to be that sort of voice saying, no, not only are you seeing these things, they are real, they exist here, but no one wants to talk about them. But we will talk about them, and I will explain how they fit into a worldview that actually fits all of these things. Because typically Bigfooters don't talk to dinosaur people. The dinosaur people don't talk to the UFO people. The UFO people don't often talk to the forbidden archaeology. They'll do some forbidden archaeology, but they won't do all of it. But then none of them talk to the real archaeologists, and none of them really want to talk to the real, um, to real people. So it's one of those things where I wanted to be that point where everyone could talk to each other and really start having more in-depth conversations, really flesh things out. They always say, beware the sound of one hand clapping. Because that means everyone's on the same page, and then there's nothing coming say, hey, is this really what you're saying? And sorry, I saw Jamie Cottrell's not 35. Mine was 8 to 10 foot wingspan. The ones that seem to be here in the southern Oklahoma and North Texas region is about an 8 to 10 foot, very small. So most people, because they do seem to look like cranes, I think people are seeing them all the time. They just don't recognize them for what they are. They just write it off as, oh, it's another crane, and they're driving on, right? Although I do think they are largely nocturnal. I'm talking to a gentleman now who's on the other side of the Red River, which is Oklahoma, who's had several. He's heard them and seen them just outside of his house, but it was all at night. It does appear that they are nocturnal by and large. So most people aren't seeing them. It's a small population. And it's just they're just big enough to be odd, but not big enough to really stand out for most people, right? They're just going to their jobs, and well, not right now, because we're all locked inside. Bigfoot could be dancing down Main Street, no one would know. But by and large, most people are just driving to and fro. They're not looking up. They're not paying attention to the wildlife that's passing right by them. So it looks enough like a crane. They're just going to say it's a crane and move on. They're not really going to take that second look, and that's how these things are hiding.
Yeah, we don't look at anything, do we? A lot of the time, apart from in front of us, maybe. And I mean, I do. I love to. There's so much out there. We have a really beautiful canal where I live that goes for miles, and there's so much going on in the embankments if you just stop and look. But yeah, it's so easy to walk past somewhere, I would imagine. How do you think? How long do you think Bigfoot's been here then?
That's a good question. I haven't made up my mind on what Bigfoot actually is, to be honest. It's let me start here. I've always, up until very recently, I was very much of the ape possibility. There was just a Gigantopithecus, right? Made the most sense. If you look at the Patterson Gimlin film, it looks very, the proportions are very, very similar to that of a chimpanzee, right? So, okay, I can deal with it. Very, very flat nose. Apes do tend to look very human. So I was kind of that thought. Plus, the larger bull males seem to have, the sagittal crest that we see on larger chimpanzees and on gorillas. So I was always very happily ensconced in it's an ape. It's just very, very large ape. But the longer I got into, the more people I started speaking with, the weirdest thing, the weirdest things kept popping up, and people kept telling the same thing, right? You keep seeing the electronic devices go off. They don't work around them. I had one guy they were working with a troop in Colorado. And one of the things, one of the stories he told me was, like we would set up these, like they would set up these cameras in trees looking down. This, they go 3-dimensional on them. They would break the trees. They knew where the cameras were, and so they set this one camera trap, one on one side of a creek, the other on the other side, where it was shallow, where a lot of animals were passing by. They're like, this is where this creature, they were moving. They'd want to pass through here. So they set up the camera traps, and they go back to review both of them, and they're working perfectly, right? If there's a raccoon, both of them are catching the raccoon at the same time, same place, perfect. Animal. Both of them then have a perfectly white screen. And then animal. And there were Bigfoot prints in the soil around them. So they're like, how is it that these cameras that are working perfectly before and after the Bigfoot passes through, and yet it only fails in the Bigfoot? And that's And that's just a very dramatic example of many of the same sort of stories you hear from Bigfooters, where it's like they have these camera traps up, but they all fail, or they're ripped off of trees because they can clearly know that they're there. Um, and then you have some, you have stories of them coming on and off of UFOs. You have people talk about mind talking. Again, I know a gentleman who I think is very honest. I would put him up against anyone in the world, and yet he claims to talk to them all the time. I think I have to take him at his word. I think he is talking to these things through mind speak. They are clearly physical creatures, though, right? They eat. See them killing wild pigs. We see them scavenging for food. They're clearly tangible creatures. They are eating. They're doing things, and yet people don't seem to see them. Here in Dallas, I just finished a book called Metroplex Monsters. It should be out in a few months. It's about the encounters in and around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Bigfoot is walking up in some of the areas I've known my entire life. The one that really shocked me was I had, if you go on, so if you're looking sort of down on Dallas, if you go east, you hit I-45. It's all wilderness out there, right along the Trinity. No big deal. I've heard of people saying that they've seen them out there all the time. Again, it's where the Trinity is. It makes perfect sense. But you jump over to the other side, where I grew up. There's this one place in Grand Prairie where essentially you have two different plates for Texas sort of butting up against each other. It's the tallest area in North Texas, and just this immediate drop. Well, there's a river or a creek that's another tributary off of the Trinity, runs right there. We have Joe Pool Lake. We have a lot of wilderness out there. But again, movie studios or movie theaters and restaurants are all right here in this area my entire life. And yet I get 5 reports of Bigfoot in the last 5 years in that area. I get police officers telling me that they've heard these things. People saying they've seen them come out from behind the tree line. And one kid was telling me about how he was trying to let out his dog, and then he sees it walk across his backyard because there's this little, sort of another little creek, and it butts against his backyard. And he just watched it walk across, and it looked at him and just kept on going. I had a friend, again, just further down south, different creek, but she and her family they heard it making calls as it went up and down their creek. One even walked up and apparently scared the crap out of her youngest kid while he was playing in the backyard. She thought he was kidding until she heard the calls. So these things are all over the place, right? They're very intelligent. They're apparently able to at least move in and out of areas that are highly occupied. They're not living out in the middle of nowhere. They're coming into cities. Now, I would argue they're able to hide, if you want to just take it purely tangibly, I've this concept of what I have, at least in Texas, what's called the green wall, right? Because again, Texas, and particularly North Texas, again, very shallow soil. Lots of trees don't grow very well in certain areas, but they're around the creeks and rivers, right? We have these trees. That's where all the things are growing, because that's where the water is. Well, also we have these tall scrub brushes, and we mow everything nicely. So because the trees aren't quite tall enough to block all the light, there's this impenetrable wall of green. Right? You go to any creek, you just stand a few yards out, take a picture. You can't see more than 2 feet into that green space. It isn't until you're on the other side of that wall that you can see anything at all. I do think they're able to hide there, but then we have stories like Davy Crockett himself. I don't know if anyone in Europe knows who Davy Crockett is, but he's one of the founders of Texas, right? Dies at the Alamo. He was out exploring an area around Nacogdoches, which is in deep East Texas. And while he's out there, and he's written this in a letter to his brother or brother-in-law, he had sat down, he was just eating lunch, right? And he talks about this creature, this massive creature walks. He says it just dissolved like out of a mist, and told him to leave this fort immediately or you'll die. And then it just disappears. And he describes it as this massive creature and monster, but also he describes it as looking kind of human. And he's like, I don't know what to do with it. In his letter, he's like, I think that he's like, I didn't eat any. He's like, I thought maybe I'd eaten something weird. I didn't eat anything for another day. He goes, I don't know what it was, but it's this specter, and he describes the creature as very much looking like a Bigfoot. So again, my problem is they're clearly tangible. They're very ape-like, but yet they seemingly can talk to people telepathically. They appear and disappear at will. They get on and off UFOs apparently. There's too much weird around them to simply wipe that away as mental illness, right? Like one or two people, sure, but it's like Davy Crockett is seeing this thing and saying it, right? Other people I know for a fact who are perfectly sane people are seeing these things, and they're affecting electronic devices. They seemingly, it's like at that point, I got to say, there's a supernatural aspect to them. Now, is that because they are some sort of hybrid creature? Maybe, right? Were they created that way? Are they something, sort of a unique kind of creation? I don't know. But there's something. And they are something physical, and there's something very clearly supernatural about them.
Yeah.
So that's as far as I'm willing to go for now.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a way, isn't it? You can't get any further apart.
I'm sorry, I am throwing a lot at you. I apologize.
No, I was going to say that I had 3 guests on who were all experiencing the same thing together one night. They were all on. One's the first guy who discovered this place where he goes to and was experiencing this thing, and then he got in touch with a BRFO investigator who they look at things kind of scientifically and with critical minds. They don't go over onto the woo side, we'll call it. Yeah. They don't look at things like that. But he took an interest in what was going on with Kevin, and Kevin's neighbour as well, Scott, went up with them. And so they're seeing, one described it as oil on water, seeing this thing form, another like a shimmering, the only way to describe it is like look like Predator, the film Predator.
Yes.
And then they went on to talk about mind speak, that they've been having communications with these things, healing. Now, I've talked to Kevin lots of times. I've no doubt what he's telling me is exactly what he's experiencing. And, that just leaves me thinking, what are these things? It's beyond natural. I mean, yeah, we've got other abilities in us, I think, more than what we know. But this seems, this shimmering, this, coming in and out. Are they coming in from different dimensions or what?
So, yeah, I mean, those are all great questions. And questions I'm not willing to necessarily have I'm not willing to say I know what that answer is yet, right? Although I will say for just a moment, just if I may derail, I just noticed I was just kind of scrolling up and down. I just realized I'm recognizing some names from my from Texas Front Porch. So hi,
excellent.
Hi, Bell Monster, and Michigan Bigfoot Rob. I think I saw him in there. I was like, hey, people I recognize.
I must go put my dog up. I think the milkman comes. He comes at a ridiculous hour, like now at half 12 at midnight. Just give me 1 second, Jason.
Go for it. Well, I guess it's just us now. So let's take a moment to scroll through. Let's see who's talking. Jamie Cotterill. Hi there. Oz Squatch Australia. Howdy from Texas. Donald Fuller. Nice to meet you. Still crazy, Chris. I like that you're owning that. Ranjo J. Hi there. Let's see who all's here. Oh, Mid-South Sasquatch. I know you.
Thank you, Jason. I know you're a bit of a pro anyway, because if anyone doesn't know, Jason co-hosts with Tex over at Trinity Cryptid Para. I forgot it the other way around.
It's no. You got it right, because here's the thing. I can't remember it too, and I did the logo. So, let me rephrase it. I did the second logo. The original logo was done. Trinity
Paracryptid
Research. Yeah. Okay. Again, Texas Front Porch. I did the second version of the logo, and even I can't remember what it is. So, but yeah, no. Yeah, I was just saying hi to all these new people, and I just keep seeing people I know. It's fun. I can't, everywhere we're all connected, right? I think that's
and
the big thing.
Yeah, and that's what all these cryptids and paranormal stuff, and it's all connecting, seems to be, doesn't it? It's all
Yes.
connected. Why is it separate from reality? You know, what is mainstream reality? How is it
Ooh.
staying in its own world? Is it because it is its own world?
Okay. Ooh. I'm trying. I'm gonna. You all seem like a really nice group of people, so I'm really trying to decide how much to say that on that. Um.
Well,
I
just
love.
say.
Here's the thing. I love the question. The problem is, okay. I always feel like there is a line where it's like you start talking about some things, and it's like some things go from fun and entertaining to being a little depressing. Honestly, I'll say this. I think the vast majority, at least in the modern world, my reading of history is people have always accepted the existence of dragons and demons and giants and magic and all of it, right? But around, and you can even read people, archaeologists, explorers, talking about discovering all these wild and fun things in the 1800s and the 1700s, and people took it seriously. But around World War One is really when that door was just absolutely closed, right? And a lot of it, I would argue, stretches back to the socialist revolutions of France, right? During what we call the, with you have Napoleon and you have all those revolutions going on. You have this what's called the rationalist movement, right? And for them, it was an extremely atheistic worldview, right? And they even like you can read papers, notes were like, how do we? They were just flat out saying, let's come up with theories to disprove the flood, right? This is where the entire concept of the ice age comes from. Is they were just saying, well, all of these things like erratics, you've got plenty of them in England, right? There's massive boulders. They're smooth. They look like massive pebbles from a river just sitting in the middle of a field, right? And you have erratics all over the world. Well, people have for centuries said that's evidence of the flood. But in around 17, again during the late 18th century, early 19th century, there was this push to just get rid of all of it and create this very Darwinian and what would eventually become a Darwinian viewpoint. Right? Darwin wouldn't sail until later. But the thing is, it was so embraced by the group of academics where they're like, "Yep, we like this. It's a purely rationalistic, meaning materialistic worldview, right? It doesn't include the existence of the supernatural, God, anything. It's all rejected. It's just what is tangible." Now, the thing is, that is great in the fact that it does, or that sort of mindset allows you to move science forward. It's like it's what you can be measured and tested and verified. Wonderful, but it throws the baby out with the bathwater, and so the problem is it creates its own doctrine, its own closed viewpoint, right? And it's like any information that doesn't align with this mentality is thrown away. The metaphor I like to use is, let's say we were walking down a street or a pathway and we saw in the grass stones arrayed in a triangular form, right? And on each one of these stones, these perfectly spherical stones, were 5 little notches. And we said, okay, let's figure out how these got here. But what we can't do is consider that that a human being carved them and put them out in the field. Any other theory is valid, but not that one. You would look at me and say that's an insane proposition. It's clearly man-made. There's a message in them. They don't conform to what we see in the natural world. These were created by at least some sort of intelligent creature and placed here to convey some sort of a message. But our world, it's the academics that have existed for over 100 years, is no, this is a purely mechanistic world. There is no supernatural. This is the one worldview that like we can move around some of the chairs on the boat, but we can't leave the boat. And so the problem is once academia fell into line, politicians found that particular viewpoint really useful, because it allows you to it allows you to look at humans as if they're nothing. If all humans are just a byproduct of some random evolutionary journey, then they have no transcendental value. If they have no transcendental value, then then they're cattle to be slaughtered. And that's the message. That's the story of the 20th century and early 21st century. Don't get me wrong. Humans have killed each other for centuries. We don't need a reason to kill each other. But man, once it became politically useful, just like, hey, we'll just kill, we don't need to worry about rights or anything, like, we'll just do that. So that viewpoint became the dominant viewpoint of academia, which became the viewpoint of government, which became the viewpoint of the media. I mean, think about how few media companies there are. There's only like 6 now. Everyone is owned by one of these 6 corporations. All of them have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, right? That's why when people see something that doesn't conform to that viewpoint, you're crazy. It's debunked. Again, I don't want to even begin to get political here, but let's look at Jeffrey Epstein, right? And all the things surrounding that. The news media immediately came out and said, oh, that's all, don't worry about that. That's all been debunked. Pizzagate's a debunked thing. None of that's real. What do you mean? Who debunked it? Who invalidated any of this information? Right? There are people who've got some real, emails from John Podesta, all of these things, but the media doesn't want it. The government doesn't want it. In many ways, the paranormal is like that whole situation with Epstein. It is damaging to their political power structure. If the supernatural is real, if humans aren't just these mechanistic meat bags walking around to be used and thrown away, then a lot of people would start saying, well, then hold on, then why do you treat us this way? Why does Kim Jong-un get to do what he does in North Korea? Why do we have why is my iPhone, I don't use an iPhone, by the way, just not for any political reason, just I'm an Android guy. But like, why are our iPhones being built in slave camps in China? Right? We would really start to wake up to that. And I think that's why they fear it. And that's why they reject anything that could ever call this into question. Anything that breaks this very fragile house of cards, political house of cards, if it calls into question, it would come tumbling down. And then power would return to the people, right? My country was founded on the idea that power should be closer to the people, which is why the president was supposed to be the least powerful person in our government. But we've got it all reversed now. No one even knows who their governors or mayors are. No one knows who their city council members are. But we all know who the president is. Why? Because the president and the Senate, they control our destinies now. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. And it's not the way, not just for us, but for anybody. Regardless of where you live, you are the human. You matter. And if I may just be me for just 2 seconds, I apologize. I don't want to usurp your show. If you're watching this show, I forget the fact that I saw a pterodactyl, forget all of it. You are a human being and you matter. You are important because you live. You are more than just what you see and can touch and can feel. And you are important to someone, no matter what you think, no matter what you believe, you are important to someone and you will be important to someone. You matter. I know it's very difficult right now, particularly with all of us locked up, to even maybe see ourselves. But trust me, you matter. You are important to this universe. You were created for a reason. Don't lose sight of that. Don't let the world tell you that you don't matter, because you do. I'm sorry. I'm done.
No, that's good.
Let's go back to your show. I'm sorry. This is not why you had me on.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's what's going on at the moment, isn't it? It kind of feels like we're all being clubbed together in one kind of pigeonhole. But and we're going to be. I mean, I don't want to go down that road, but just say we get forced vaccinations. Just say we get implanted with microchips. We are going to lose our identity.
Yes.
Life is not going to be as it should be. And, it's worrying. But I think, like you say, we're all important. We've all got a voice. We've all got the power, I think, to turn this around if we want to. but people have to kind of wake up and look further into what's being put out there.
Yes.
And ask more questions and not just, all right, someone's in charge, but you can still challenge
Yes.
and ask, why are we doing this?
Yes.
And
No, exactly.
so, yeah, that's my bit now. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, right? If I saw a pterodactyl, then clearly, and if I was the only one to have seen it, you could write me off as insane, right? But there are plenty of people who've seen them. And so the simple fact of the matter is, if I've seen them, if they've been here, that calls this whole Darwinian system into question, right? If the London hammer is what it is, for those of you who don't know, there's a hammer that's found in London, Texas, as Danielle and I were describing or discussing earlier. Every city in Europe is in Texas now. It was a hammer that was found in Cretaceous rock. It's supposed to be 240 million years old, but it's a hammer that doesn't rust, right? We find artifacts in coal mines all the time. The simple fact of the matter is, the worldview that we are force fed is not the one that actually happened. And I would argue that the stuff that we see, the Sasquatches, the UFOs, the big feet, Sasquatch I still haven't decided what the plural of Sasquatch is. It all of it fits within a biblical framework, and that's the thing that the world doesn't want, right? At least those in power don't want, because regardless of whether it's the Bible that is correct or some other version, the simple fact of the matter is clearly the version that they support that is not accurate. That's what they don't want, because the last thing that they want is yes, Digger Dog, the bronze bell. That one's really interesting. The simple fact of the matter is, anything that takes power from them and gives it back to us is what they don't want, right? They want you. George Carlin used to say they want you just smart enough to pay your bills and push the buttons, right? Anything that causes you to realize, hey, there's a bigger world out there, and I'm a bigger part of it, that makes you dangerous. And anything that calls this facade into question, like a Sasquatch or living dinosaurs or the rake or whatever, they got to shut it down. They can't. They don't want us existing, but they can't hide it anymore. I think that's again, like we said, we all found each other. I'm seeing people who I recognize, and you're running your show out of England. I just did a show with some friends of mine the other day. We have people from Ireland who were watching us. One guy in Russia was saying hi, and I'm like, here we are, right? We've it's like they can't hide anymore. The information is growing, and there's no way to hide it anymore. And at some point, there's going to be a tipping point when this will be accepted in the common world. I just don't know when that's going to be.
No. So let's go back to archaeology and ancient civilization.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember where it is, but there's a big. It's lying flat and it's being carved out. It's been left in situ as it is, but it has this scooping. It looks like some tool's been used to scoop out this stone. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. It looks like it's been vitrification has been used, heat has been used on it. Yeah.
But it's so old. I mean, what's
right
wrong with these ancient civilizations? What did they have? Why haven't we caught up with that?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this a totally different kind of breed that was on the earth at that time?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say there's at least two. The simplest answer is, particularly with what we found, whether it's the London hammer. There's a friend of mine, Joe Taylor, out in Crosbyton. He has a cast that he's made of these impressions that were found in sandstone. Again, supposed to be 300 million years old, right? Well, it's literally out in the middle of nowhere, and it was on an Indian reservation, and so they've known about it for centuries. But they're like, we don't know what this is. Well, if he took a casting of it, and it looks like modern day pipes with valves attached to them. and they've been there for centuries, impressed into the sandstone. So it's like a fossil of an artifact, and we find them all over the place. It is clear that there was, in ancient times, a very advanced civilization. Now the question is, why does that civilization no longer exist? Why don't we have records of it? And how did they become so advanced? I would argue that, again, the problem is we do have records of them. The Sumerians talked about them. The Bible talks about them. Everyone talks about it. That there was a catastrophic event that happened in the ancient past that wiped out a very advanced civilization. Only a few people made it through, and basically society had to start over again. That is a very common theme found in virtually all the world's cultures, right? So the simple fact of the matter is, so the question is, that's the story that everyone's telling us. That's the story that we're seeing in archaeology. So then it had to have, that the simplest answer is that's what happened. There was an ancient human civilization of advanced technology that was wiped out. Now the question becomes, how did they get that advanced? Well, Book of Enoch and the Book of Genesis discuss a time when the Watchers descended from the sky. They were a class of angel that became physical. They interbred, but they also taught humanity things that we were supposed to have earned on our own, right? That sort of thing is technology in education that we didn't have natively, that created this whole civilization that their children, the Nephilim, ruled. And so that's the story, and it seems to make the most sense. It matches with, again, not just, regardless of whether or not you think it's the version of the Bible in the Book of Enoch is the correct version, it's the same story that we see in all the world's religions. So it's clear that that's what we're finding. That's where the artifacts. That's why the Lennon hammer doesn't rust. I'm actually working on a project. It's called the Creation Museum in a Box, and you'll be able to order it, and it'll have a copy of the London hammer and the iron pot found in coal with some other things as to the human footprints we find in not just the same rock strata as dinosaur footprints, but we have dinosaur footprints where a human has stepped into it, right? It's sort of clear that dinosaurs, humans, we coexisted very recently, and that the world is not as old as we seem to think it is. Or let me rephrase this: the version of the world that we know is not as old as it used to be. The Earth could have been much older, but that humans, dinosaurs, we're all very, very recent creatures here. What we have is all of this makes perfect sense, except it doesn't fit in the worldview that we're sold on a daily basis. Once you realize that's the illusion, then you're like, okay, well, everyone in the universe knew what the story was 3,000 years ago, but why have we rejected it? So, that's when we find things like that. It's just very clear. There was a time when we were way more advanced. I don't want to say we're more advanced than we are now. I think that's a step too far. I don't know that we had space travel or anything like that, or computers, but we had vastly superior technology than what we often think the ancient world had, right? It's clear a bunch of Paleolithic people did not build some of these structures. They didn't, they weren't making hammers that don't rust. They weren't using pipes that have valves. They weren't making these perfect precision carvings. But let's look at it this way: some of these constructions, if you're a stonemith and you live to be, or stonemason, you live 900 years, what in the heck kind of thing would you be able to do in year 500 of your career, right? What would you know? You don't have to be smart. You just had to have lived long enough to have done everything. The older, I mean, you look at some of these old craftsmen and they're just knocking things out. Everything's perfect. And you're like, how did you do that? They're like, well, I've spent the last 30 years doing this. Well, imagine if you spent 30 years just being an apprentice, and then you did that career for another 300, 400, 500 years. What would you have learned? And what would you not be able to learn? What could you discover? Imagine if Einstein had lived 300 years. If we still had him around today, how many advancements how quickly could we advance if you don't have that knowledge that gets lost, right? last 2,000 years, you can, and really 3,000 years, you can find writings of people doing really amazing things with some really primitive technology, but then that person dies and he doesn't keep complete notes, or a library burns down, or there's a plague, right? And so all that's lost. If you have people living 900 years, what would they develop, right? And that all makes perfect sense, particularly if you have some sort of supernatural creature driving them forward and saying, hey, since we were here when things were made, that's how this works. You might want to look at it this way. And that allows them to build and grow much more rapidly than if we were just, walking around going, can we actually eat that? I don't know. Who do we not like today? Bob, could you go eat that thing for us? Did he die? Well, not yet. Yeah, he's dead. Okay, don't eat that. Right? It's like if you can advance much faster if someone's giving you the cheat codes. And that's what happened. There was a civilization that had the cheat codes. They were able to advance very quickly, but they were destroyed. And we've just been rebuilding since then.
Do you think greed as well, the way we've become, not maybe the kind of guys like us, but those higher ones up, have changed the way we share information and live easier lives? How do you feel about the pyramids? Because the pyramids are all over the place. If they were an energy generating machine, basically giving off free energy, if we can create free energy, why, and we don't have it, do we? We have to pay for, even for the water. That's is greed taking away our ability to advance, because it seems to be for the elite that get to see how advanced we can be, who have the money to have access to that, kind of stuff.
Right. Okay, so I like how you phrase that question. What I would say is greed's always been a very human emotion, right? Greed drives a lot of what we do. Like I said, I grew up the son of a mechanic. I tend to be very practical about things. I'm a guy talking about UFOs and shadow people, living pterodactyls, and yet I'm over here saying I'd like to be practical. They don't seem to go hand in hand, but I would argue that they do, right? So what I mean by that is, in many ways, humans individually being able to pursue their own interests has advanced us great faster than we ever have, probably even without, than prior to the angels. So I don't think that, I would argue that the problem is we tend to lump greed with self-interest into the same thing, right? I would argue that greed is inherently competitive. Greed says, I want what everyone else has at their detriment. Self-interest just says, I want to do the best I can do. So let me preface the rest of what I'm about to say with this. I don't in general believe in large overarching conspiracies, despite what I've just said. I don't really believe like that there is this one all overarching human group that's like, we control everything. What I do think though is that there are very powerful people who are pursuing their interest at the disadvantage of others, right? And I think the simple fact of the matter is, we see, the problem, we can see that they don't have control, but the fact that we're talking, right? We're all talking on this. This is getting out there. Ancient Aliens is one of the biggest shows on television. It's kind of clear they don't have complete control. No one can. No, unfortunately, let's be honest. I don't see any evidence that humans are smart enough for most of these overarching conspiracies where everything is controlled by a small group. I can't even, at work, I can't even get, 5 people to turn in the reports on time. You mean to tell me that there's a group of 13 families that control everything? No. What I do think, though, is, again, you get enough senators, you get enough photos of senators with little children, I think you can get whatever you want, though, right? I do, and I would argue that history has proven that those who least deserve power are those who will do anything to obtain it. But they do so by utilizing and using people. So I think the problem is we've advanced. we are clearly more advanced than we were 3,000 years ago, and we've advanced a lot over the last 100 years once we really sort of cracked open freedom. So I don't think that they have the level of control we think they do. Oftentimes, I think it just looks like it. But are they holding back free energy? I'm actually not entirely convinced that pyramids necessarily were used as a power source, right? At least not for power, at least not for technology for the common man. I just don't. I'm not convinced that I see that. I do think though that they were used in ways we haven't really considered. I do think that maybe they were used as conduits or portals for supernatural beings, right? I think the problem is we often tend to think just about us, right? Those of us with flesh and bone and our uses and how we would do something. I think we have to always remember that a lot of these civilizations were controlled by supernatural creatures, right? Beings that aren't hindered by causality, by flesh and bone, by physics as we know them, right? They are made of something. They're just made of something that's exotic to us. Well, that pyramidal structure, the the piezoelectric properties of some of these stones in the designs, that may be something that they can utilize and gives them power and access to our world that doesn't necessarily help us, right? And in fact, I would argue that if you look back at all the ancient gods, particularly, they were just feeding off of humans and all of the things that we created, the human sacrifices, the temples. Those were for their benefit, not ours. So I don't know that we've necessarily hidden free energy per se. What I would say though is we have I think we are definitely being held back because there are truths that are being restricted. So I don't know that we'd be on Mars by now with free energy, but I do think that we'd be further advanced. I think we'd definitely be a nicer group of a nicer civilization if we really revealed everything that was found. I think if we could say, "Hey, look, this is what we see. This is the true history of humanity." I think we'd turn around and go like, "Yeah, that maybe we shouldn't be killing each other. Maybe all these wars for these petty dictators don't make sense, right?" I can't. Okay, this is gonna sound stupid, but just give me a second here. Indiana Jones, right? All of the first three, the best films, all take place prior to World War II, right? The Nazis are running around, but what's he doing? He's finding the Ark of the Covenant, and he's finding the Holy Grail. Well, that's all proof. It's like, and at the end of all those movies, they're all those things are locked away or hidden, right? No one's ever told that these things exist. Well, what would have happened if someone rolled out and be like, "Boom! Here's the Ark of the Covenant. Here's all the face melted Nazis. They opened it up and something came out of it and just blew them away." So Adolf Hitler, this is a real thing. The Jews are, and their God are clearly real. Maybe you don't want to throw them into concentration camps. And maybe, by the way, if that means that there is a God, we should all be nicer to one another. How does that change history? Well, let's look at Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Hold on. I swear I'm getting somewhere. At the end of that film, what happens? Bill and Ted walk out like, here's time travel. That's death. That's an alien. The world's a great place to live. And what happens? What do we know? Well, we know that everything's clean. George Carlin told us. Even the dirt's clean, right? You tell everyone, hey, this stuff's all real. The universe is really big. There's a God, there's a Satan, there's an alien, there's death, and that's Napoleon over there hanging out with Joan of Arc. It's all groovy. Everyone starts to go, hey, maybe I matter more, right? Maybe I'm more than that, and the world becomes a better place. Like I said, it's a weird argument, but compare and contrast, right? I think the simple fact of the matter is we're right. Yeah, if you hide everything, you keep everything petty, you keep everything about the physical, you keep everything about the flesh, about how much you make. If that's all you are, that's all you're ever going to be. And if that's all you're ever going to be, then everyone who's in that society remains petty. And that society then grows dark. It becomes evil. No one cares. But as soon as you say, hey, you matter, these things are real. The universe is much bigger than you can possibly imagine. There's more going on, and that you do matter as an individual because there's a thing that created you. I think society changes. And throughout human history, the societies that say this They're the ones that prosper. They're the ones that usually move things forward. Those are the people who bring the rest of humanity out of that very bitter, very dark, very self-interested, and very greedy sludge, right? I mean, let's be honest. The kings and queens of old, regardless of what country you came from, they weren't in it for the people. They were in it for themselves. You know, I mean, and the simple fact of the matter is that's if you live in this thing, if you live for this only, then that's what you're going to be, and you're going to step on everyone to get there, and you're going to hide those things that tell you that you're wrong, because then that means you don't get any. Because once you realize, oh, I don't really actually have any power. I only have the power if the humans act, if everyone around me thinks I have power. Oh well, then I can't let that fall apart, because I like living in a castle, or I like living on my yacht, or I like living on the slave plantation where everyone's doing my work for me.
I wonder how we're going to change after lockdown. How we're going to, if this is going to have a shift in, say, the younger generation. Like my parents went through. Were young when the war went on, and they knew what it was like to, live on rations, and my mum had to leave Poland in a van and meet in a forest, and they were taken out of there, and they were lucky to get out. And our generation don't know what it was like to go through that, and I wonder if they're kind of feeling it now, and if this will change it, have a shift in the way the new generations treat other people in life, and whether or not that becomes a new, if we were going to be kinder, and that change shifts the way the world is going. Someone's saying here it's getting a bit deep tonight. I think it is going a bit deep tonight.
Yeah, I came here to talk about pterodactyls.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that.
Oh no, hey, this is the kind of stuff I live for. You only talk about pterodactyls for so long. I mean, they're flying lizards. What do you want to do? But I think that's a great question, and I don't know. The cynic in me says we're going to go back to being what we were. The optimist in me says that's going to be true for some, but not all. I think there's the thing that a lot of people. Okay, a lot of people like to look at millennials and be like, look at it, they can't do things, and that and I'm kind of like, hold up. Okay, so there are things that they've never dealt with, right? Some of these kids have never seen a rotary phone. Some of these kids have never had to dial one for long distance. Like, let's just be honest, they live in a different world. But y'all can't program your VCRs, Grandma. I know, because I had to do it for you. So let's give them that. But in many ways, when you take a larger perspective, a lot of the millennials, they do things that we haven't seen in other generations. They will volunteer more. They will take low paying or zero pay internships more readily than any other generation. And I think the simple fact of the matter is the generation that's coming up now, they saw the massive economic collapse of 2008 and really 2001. They've lived, many of them have lived their entire lives during this post 9/11 world. I think a lot of people who've grown up during this age they're seeing a lot of what the generation that grew up during the Depression saw, right? And that generation that grew up in the Depression, we call that the greatest generation, because they saw hardship. They saw that a lot of things that were the way things worked before didn't work anymore. That's also the generation that helped bring about civil rights, right? It's very easy to look down on the previous generation, because that's what humans do. You can go back and find writings from the Greeks where they're like, man, these kids and their music today, it's and it's like from 3000 BC. You're like, wait a minute. You can find stuff from the 16th century talking about how all this music that they're coming up with now that we consider to be some of the greatest music of all time. And they're like, this is just crap. They're destroying our entire civilization. So I think that things like the lockdown, like 2008, like 9/11, these hard times breed stronger people. I think the easier things are, the more prosperous things are. The problem is if we take that sort of macro view, they breed very soft people, and the problem is soft people lead to bad times, but bad times bring strong people, and those strong people bring more prosperity. They bring more movement forward. They bring new technology. They change the way society looks at things. I have long said, you know what? We decided out of nowhere to call these people millennials. But what is it that all Christians are supposed to be looking for? The millennial kingdom, right? It's like if we all genuinely think we're coming closer to the end, and I would argue that we are. I have a book on that, but it's like if we are, then maybe these are the people that usher us into that kingdom. Maybe they're the ones who are being prepared for it. They're the ones who've seen the three different economic collapses. These are the people who've looked and said, "Hey, the way we've been doing things doesn't really work. Not for everybody." Not the way we think they do. Maybe we need to change some things up. It's a lot of times we've always said, well, let's just revise what we're doing. I heard someone say these kids have all grown up on computers where if something's broken, you press Control-Alt-Delete and you reboot the system. You start from scratch and fix it. What we've been trying to do is say, well, here's this broken system. Let's not take the system away and replace it with something that's going to work better. Let's just put some twine here and let's wrap it in duct tape, right? We're trying to jerry-rig this thing together. They may be far more willing to go, hold up, this thing is clearly not working. Let this thing over here works. Why don't we try this? Let's get rid of the stuff that doesn't work. Let's learn from the things that do work about this system. But then let's build something new that's not quite, as covered in duct tape, like my first car, right? So I think so. Again, the short answer to your question is I don't think everyone's going to learn to be a better person from this, but I ultimately think that this will bring about a society or a group of people rather will learn from it and they will move forward and they will bring the rest of us with them.
Yeah, I hope that happens. Anyway, let's just flip to you being an artist, and people keep mentioning the pterodactyl that you saw because we can talk about. Did you sketch it? Have you got a sketch of it?
Oh, well, okay. So the one I only saw for I've done sketches for other people. Trying to think if I have any. Here's my problem. I have all my art stuff in the desk that you're sitting on. That my laptop is sitting on. So I'm worried if I open it, it'll fall out. But give me a second.
All right.
Let me see what I can find here.
I don't want to put you to too much trouble.
Oh, it's fine. I just don't want to knock things over.
We've got Kerry Arnold in the chat tonight. Hello, Kerry. Anybody who hasn't gone over to the Shudder, go over to the Shudder and give it a sub, a like.
Oh, hey, Kerry. Well, I'll get some artwork from. Here we are. For my new book, actually. Hold on.
Is that a new book just coming out?
It's coming out it should be coming out sometime in September.
Okay.
This is going to be amazing to watch. This is going to be great material. I apologize. All right, here we are. We got some stuff here. All right, here we are. This at least give you a sampling of some artwork, at least as well. Let's see if I can do this without breaking anything. Are we all still here? Good.
We're still here.
That's actually one that happened in Cedar Hill. That's a Bigfoot encounter. Sort of what happened. Let's see if I can get a little bit closer for you. There you go. That's actually something that created with the Cedar Hill Goat Man mythology. Here is Davy Crockett and his Bigfoot encounter. Wow. Here we are. This is what you were asking about. See if I can.
Oh yeah, that's it. Wow, that's incredible.
Now the one I saw didn't have a head crest, but this particular image is from an encounter that was had in Fort Worth just 2 years ago. Literally, the thing flew over I-20, which is like one of the major veins or highways in the North Texas region. And he was basically he was leaving Fort Worth, and the thing just flew over, like 20 feet in front of his truck. That's the overpass, literally, because he knew where he was, and I mapped it out, and it's exactly where this overpass is. So it's entirely possible they tend to glide more than fly. At least that's my thought. If we want to get into that a little bit more, so my thought is that they tend to glide. I think the reason I saw mine where it was in the 10 Mile Creek, and the two women who saw it 15 years, who saw one 15 years later in that same area, flying into the creek, is I think that they tend to ride thermal currents and air currents, right? That's why I believe they and the larger pterodactyls are connected to the thunderbird mythology, is that they do tend to go and ride the currents of these thunderstorms, right? That we're famous for. They will catch them, and it allows them to fly up, higher in the air. So they're riding those currents, which is why I think that the reason I saw them in the creek is, again, it's a creek with two limestone walls, right? So that air pressure is going to be different than it would be above. So it's using it to glide. Sort of how pelicans use it when they, they sort of stay low over the water, right? They're using those currents and that air pressure to kind of keep themselves aloft. I think they're doing the same thing. And it doesn't mean they can't fly on their own, but I think it's easier for them. I think they're trying, they're cold-blooded creatures, so I think they're using they're just trying to be as efficient as possible. It isn't. I'm not convinced yet, but there are many who have seen them who believe that they are capable of some form of some sort of biochemical light, right? Like they can create their own sort of. Some argue it's an exceptionally bright light, but that they are not just capable of changing the color of their skin like a chameleon, but they can actually light up, right? Sort of bioluminesce, like some octopi can and fish. Again, I'm not saying that they can, but I think there's a really good argument for that to be the case. And that there's a direct connection in Cedar Hill, again, between me, where I had my sighting, and the guy in Fort Worth. There's a city called Cedar Hill. For years, they had these lights that would show up in a particular area, not too far from where the Bigfoot was seen. But again, that's where there's this massive cliff, right, in a creek. So I think it's very possible that a lot of these ghost lights that people see all throughout Texas are these ramphoractoids lighting up. Maybe they're using it as a mating call. Maybe they're using it to attract insects, which attracts bats, and they're eating the bats. We don't know what they're for. But there were two videos that came out of Cedar Hill just a few years ago. Both of them were in front of a large thunderstorm, and they have these lights in the sky. A lot of people would call them UFOs, but it's like but the problem is they don't exhibit to traditional UFO capabilities, right? They're not like zipping all over the place. They're moving, sort of meandering rather slowly. And one would like sort of flicker off, and then it would flicker back on over here. But they hadn't jumped anywhere. It's just they're sort of meandering around, which sort of is more indicative of a organic creature flying using those currents. And we see similar things with the ropin of Papua New Guinea, right? Similar stories, similar alleged appearances. And it kind of goes even back to Isaiah. It talks about the fiery flying serpents. Well, you go to the Hebrew, it's very clearly that's what it's saying, right? These are something that's unique to this area. Well, Herodotus wrote about these tiny dragons that the ibis would eat their eggs. That's why the ibises were worshipped in Egypt. But that these were they were small flying dragons that they would hang out in certain trees, and they were just a nuisance, right? They could bite you, and it would cause people to die of they said venom, but I tend to think it's probably more like the Komodo dragon, where it's more of a bacterial thing. But again, it goes back to they were called by the Hebrew the fiery flying serpents. So that's not something, that's not a bird, that's not a snake, that's something unique. And we see them all throughout human history. They're the wyvern of Europe. I would argue that these pterodactyls are seen in New Jersey. The Jersey Devil I would argue, is actually a pterodactyl. The drawing that we all see of it, where it has the head of bat wings and hooves and all that was done by, again, an artist who'd never seen this thing. He was going off of what people had seen, and he lived in Pittsburgh, if I recall correctly. No, Pennsylvania. He lived in Pennsylvania, and he was just doing some artwork. He didn't take it seriously, and so he's just putting a deer head on top of this and giving it bat wings, and he's just doing that. He's not actually saying, what do these people actually see? And that they're using language that they're familiar with, right? This is late 1800s. They weren't familiar with dinosaurs. They didn't know what a pterodactyl was. They didn't know these things. So they didn't say, hey, I saw a pterodactyl. They just said, I saw something and I don't know what it is. It had bat-like wings. It had a head kind of shaped like a deer maybe, but it was big and it had a long tail. Again, the telling story there is it has a long tail. It has a head that they were unfamiliar with and bat-like wings. That's a pterodactyl, or specifically a rhamphorhactoid pterosaur. So I think the problem is, again, we take a lot of art, as someone who studied art history, the problem is with all these drawings of dragons, we assume that what we're seeing is the artist seeing the dragon, and that's not the case. All they're doing is taking what people have seen and what they've been told, and then they're just translating it directly. They aren't actually thinking through that these are just people trying to tell them something, right, and convey it to them. Most people aren't trained observers. They aren't trained to say, I saw this weird thing and let me describe it perfectly to you. They just see it and they're reacting to it. We see this with myths of like the cockatrix, right? It's this old dragon that I thought was the most, I'm like, well, clearly that wasn't a real thing. But the more I looked into it, the more you realize that the ancient descriptions of it were, it's a dragon with the head and body of a chicken, but the rest of it's a dragon. You're like, well, that's insane. Well, it's only been the last 30 years we realized that certain theropods had feathers. So if you're living on some farm 2,000 years ago in India, right, and you've got chickens, and you know that there are dragons, and that's about all you just those small group of animals is all you know, and you see something like, say, an oviraptor. What do you call it? Well, how do you describe it? It's a theropod, so it's a we'd say it's a dinosaur, but it looks like a chicken. It had feathers, right? It's clearly a dragon. So he's like, it's a dragon that looked like a chicken. And so, to us, it sounds preposterous, but to an archaeologist, it's like, yeah, that's how I would expect someone who lived 2,000 years ago to describe seeing some of these theropods. So these things, the broader point here is all these creatures have been here. They've always been here. They've lived alongside us this entire time. But in the last 100, 200 years, we've written it all off. Because I think a lot of we tend to forget there was a huge climactic shift about 1,000 years ago. We're very, a lot of people like to say, oh, it's the hottest it's ever been in 1,000 years. Do you know how hot it was 1,000 years ago? It was real warm. Where you live, Julius Caesar wrote about how the wine from Britain was some of the best wine in the world. Well, y'all aren't growing wine right now. It's not the temperature for it. You have to go a little further south. Well, but that wasn't the case 1,000 years ago. Well, what happens 1,000 years ago? We have the Maunder Minimum, where it was called the Mini Ice Age. The Thames River used to freeze over for centuries. You had the frost fairs. Doctor Who has talked about them. I knew about them before Doctor Who, but I did like the fact that Doctor Who brought them up.
It would be true if Doctor Who said it.
Yeah, exactly. Doctor Who said it's got to be true. Exactly. But yeah, I mean, the Thames River used to freeze over for these frost fairs so completely, people would bring elephants on it.
Wow.
Now, that is a huge climactic shift. That's why, like Europeans tend to drink beer, was because the growing season was so bad that you only had one harvest of barley and wheat, and so you had to preserve those calories. Again, back in the day, before we had refrigeration, before we could do these things, so they turned them into beer and ales. That was just to survive these winters. Well, once you had that huge climactic shift, a lot of what we call dragons died off. A lot of things died off 1,000 years ago because of that climactic shift back then. And so a lot of things that were changed 1,000 years ago, and it threw a lot of things into upheaval, and it caused a lot of these creatures to go extinct, at least in areas where Europeans were dealing with them. They weren't having to deal with them anymore. And so we just sort of assumed, okay, well, they're all dead, but now we're 200, and then you go forward, now it's a couple hundred years later, we're like, oh, they don't even exist at all, right? But if you'd gone back 500 years ago, they're like, yeah, they're kind of rare, but they're real. It's just that shift. Because we're not making any new fossils, right? It's very hard to say, hey, these things were real, because they've all turned to dust, as things do.
Yeah. History is very important, isn't it? Research, and we say it, quite lightly, actually, sometimes, don't we? and you've obviously quite thorough with your research, and I'm sure you're looking in all sorts of places. On your website, do you keep do you log any of these sightings and things like that, or do you just kind of talk about the research you're doing?
So yeah, that I haven't had a chance to deal with a lot of them. I feel very terrible. I haven't been able to keep up with my website for the last couple months because I've been between the books and a few other things. I'm getting ready, however, to completely revamp it. So a lot of this is going to be a lot more easily accessible. There's going to be sort of a digital museum, and then I'm working on developing S.I.R.U into a show as well. It won't be like what you're doing. What text does is where it's very it's a live stream. It's going to be more recorded, more produced. To bring these things, but yes, there's going to be a section for sightings, right? Where it's like, hey, let's talk about when, where, what it is, so people can see it and people can actually see a lot of the evidence for it, right? Like the unicorn, right? That's one of the early articles I wrote about was the misidentified monsters of the Bible. It was people look at the unicorns like, oh, the Bible talks about unicorns. Well, what they're talking about were rhinoceri, right? The North African rhinoceros, but in that Melu and why it's like the trick is finding why they would use the word unicorn, and it goes back to the Greeks. Well, it shows that there was some group of Elasmotherium running around, and then we see later on. Well, hold up, there's a carving of what is very clearly an Elasmotherium in Nineveh, right from about the 1800s BC, late 1800s, early 1700s. It's like this stele was created, and it was talked about all these animals that were brought before the king. One of them is very clearly an Elasmotherium, which was basically just a giant woolly rhinoceros with a single horn in between its eyes. It's a very different looking animal than what we're used to today, but they did exist. And so a lot of that's going to be, we're going to have sections where you can go through and look at it and actually see, oh, this isn't Billy Bob out in Nowheresville, Texas is saying, well, yep, I didn't talk to my daughter wife, and she said that she saw this thing and it was fun. No, that's not what this is. It's going to be, here's all of the evidence we need, but this is what the evidence actually says. But then here's where we have to draw that line, right? I do, like I said, I would like to have more of an opinion on certain things, but I'm like, but this is all the evidence says, right? Now, some people are like, oh, you can't take, any of that. I say, let's take it for what it is, right? People record what they see. It may not be as accurate as we would like. It may be filled with poetic language, but let's at least look at what they had to say. And then let's compare and contrast it with other accounts from other cultures. Let's look at what we've seen with other artifacts that we found, with other examples of other animals that we've uncovered through archaeology. Let's take a look at these things, and then let's see what actually comes out of it. What can we say yes, no? What can we say no to? And let's build a better idea of what this world actually is. Because the problem is, with all this information scattered, to and fro, we don't really see the whole picture, right? We don't see the movements of history. What we see is only what we're allowed to see, and that's where things become. That's when we start again going back to the beginning, petty, and then we're fighting again. I find it funny that people fight about Sasquatch, and I'm like, whoa, guys, hold up. Why don't we fight until we actually have something to fight over? What we have are people's accounts. Let's just take the accounts for what they are. Let's look at people and say, well, does this guy look credible? Yes or no? If he looks credible, then let's at least take it and deal with it. If it's not credible, then let's get rid of it. But we can't say it's not credible because they're saying something we don't like, right? It's like I don't like using other people's names because it seems like I'm coming against them or not. But the simple fact of the matter is, I've heard people say there's never a reason to go for woo with Sasquatch, and I'm like, well, you're just cutting off an entire wing of sightings. How about we say, look, you may not think that's a real thing, but can we ask why these people saw it? Maybe there is something going on. Maybe there's just a bunch of people who have who maybe have some issues mentally, or maybe there is something real. Maybe Sasquatch isn't what you think it is. Let's just take all of the evidence and then weigh it and contrast it and see what turns up.
This is the thing, isn't it? You can't take away people's encounter, and the whatever they're telling you it is, that's how just their perception, isn't it? And like you say, it's not necessarily what they might think it is. And I mean, there's actually a lot of, like you say, there's the data out there, but it's knowing whether it's all correct, and also because there's missing data as well.
Yes.
Yeah, how do you start connecting and logging it all? But like you say, the more people you talk to, you know what you can rule out, pretty obvious stuff, and then there's that odd detail that makes you think. There's a lot to be said about it. I always say I'd rather listen to someone's encounter than try and show me a picture of Blob Squatch and try and convince me that there's something there. I don't want to strain my eyes anymore. Just tell me your story, because there's much more in that depth to that than a photo or. So, but yeah, it is trawling through the accounts, isn't it, and starting to log it to somehow create a database of information. I'm sure people are doing it out there, but
Yes.
it's been fascinating talking to you, and we've not really scratched the surface, I don't think. I think we've literally just only got the pterodactyl, need to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, exactly. With this show has gone completely sideways from what I was expecting, and I apologize for that.
No, don't apologize.
But back to what you're saying, right? Just real quick, there was a photograph. I'll have to find it for next time that MUFON has, and they're like, "This is a UFO," and you look at it and you're like, "No, that's a pterodactyl that's lighting up. Like you can see the iridescence in the wings. You can see where the head is. You can see where there's a tail and there's a flange. It's just fuzzy, but it's because they were moving. They took the photo. It was just something bright to them, but on the camera you can see, oh, that's what it is. So it's like you said. I wonder. It's not just that we have data that's lost. We have data that's mismanaged, even, right? And so that's where a lot of this comes from. So that's what I'm saying. Don't fight over things. Let's just gather the data first. Let's put everything. Let's start sorting it out. As an artist, one of the things you learn when you're working with a group on like a movie or a comic or whatever is brainstorming, right? It's like there is such thing as a bad idea. You throw the idea out there and you play with it, then you see it. That's what we need to be doing with data. Let's just get all of the data in. Let's not fight over who's right or wrong. Let's just get the data in. Let's see who's credible, who's not. Let's just take that data and roll with it, and then we can start learning something. But we're fighting before we have anything in, and that's holding us back.
I also think as well, with people's encounters, it might be hard enough to tell someone that you've seen something strange. But imagine you've experienced something supernatural as well. I wonder how many people don't hold back on some of the information that they give, which can totally change, everything that they're saying if they were willing to say everything. But I understand it's not that easy, but I'm sure we're missing. People are holding lots of clues.
Oh yeah.
But they're not giving them out for obvious reasons,
Oh, absolutely. I've spoken with numerous people who've said, this is, what I've said publicly, but we know what you've written. We've seen what you've talked about. They're like, but this is what I really saw. And I'm like, why didn't you say that over there? And they're like, because these people believe it's Sasquatch, but they don't believe that this stuff happens. And I'm like, but you're not helping anybody by keeping this private. I will keep everything private unless you tell me it's for air. There's a ton of people I work with who, they've had shadow people encounters or sleep paralysis. I work with them. No one knows that that's their story. But once I came public with what I've seen and what I do, I had 3 different people from my church come up and tell me, hey, I saw a goat man, not a Bigfoot, an actual satyr in downtown Dallas, around White Rock Lake. People have talked about him for decades, really, because the lake only existed for the last 70 years. But it's like these things people have seen these things. And then again, that's when I found out about a friend of mine who'd seen a pterodactyl. And it's like another friend of mine who I'd known or his father rather, I've known him for 30 years. And he's like, yeah, I saw a Sasquatch. I was out with some buddies riding my motorcycle. And I'm like, how have I known you people for literally decades? And none of you have said anything. They're like, well, we were worried. And then you talk to people who have these encounters and like, well, here's the supernatural aspect of it. But they're like, but I didn't want to tell anybody because I was worried about it. So I think the problem is we in our community, the one thing I say is let's stop judging the encounter. Let's just take the encounter. Maybe they completely misunderstood what's happening, right? But that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means we need to understand that there it can be a discrepancy between what people see and when it's actually happening. But let's take all the data in, then let's just say, hey, what can we come from this? What can we pull out of it? I think there's a lot more to be found in, like, say, things like the just Beowulf, right? Let's look at how Grendel's described in Beowulf. Let's look at how dragons are described in the Dragon of Rhodes. How do they actually describe it to the ancient text, not later things? Let's go back to the original artwork. Let's go back to the original text, and then let's compare and contrast that with what we're seeing today. Let's just put it all in a big pile and sort through things and see what patterns show up. And let's stop yelling at one another and creating. It's like, well, this camp is for this and this camp is for this. Can't we're already fighting the rest of the world who thinks we're crazy for even asking these questions. We're fighting a world that doesn't want us to know these answers. Can't we at least, can't we all just get along? It's like we're already the odd man out. We don't need to be fighting amongst ourselves.
But the other issue as well is people are stuck in their own paradigms, aren't they? And that's where things come to a stop. When they reach that boundary, they have to they'll try and rationalize it, and then you start losing sight of what's happened, or that you can do. It's very difficult, isn't it? The ideal thing is when you experience something, is to write it down straight away.
Yes,
literally what's happened, and that's it, and then try and work it out. I know that doesn't work, does it? In the when a situation happens, but there's a lot of distortion going on, I think, because of people's beliefs. If you strongly believe in something, that is going to distort the truth, maybe, of what's happened.
Yes.
So it's difficult, isn't it?
Oh, it is, because we want to make things fit within the paradigms that make us feel safe. The problem is the truth is never safe, right? The truth is the truth. It's never safe and it's never comfortable. The only way to really address truth is simply to stand up and address it and just realize, if I need to change, I need to change. If I need to change everything that I believed in because this is what the truth is, and that's what I got to do. But the trick, though, is to be honest about it and to face it head on. Something that's very difficult to do. It's uncomfortable, and I'll be honest, most people don't do it. Right? There's a reason the majority doesn't pursue these things. They don't want to. It makes them uncomfortable. I can't tell you how often I've heard people say, look, if there's a Bigfoot out there, I don't want to know about it. Dude, you're hunting every season. Don't you want to know that there's an 800-pound? Because it's never bothered them before. Why? I don't want to know that that's out there. Okay, fine. But it's like it's that disconnect from reality that I think most people live in. They just want to watch the television. They want to go play football or soccer, which is probably going to be very confusing for everyone listening to me in the UK. They want to play American football or British football, right? They want to go fishing. They want to do, they want to go to movies. They want to go to bars or pubs. They want to do these things, and they don't want to be bothered by the rest of the world. They just want to live their lives, right? They don't really care. I think the thing that we also need to remember is that's just human nature, unfortunately, that we're fighting. And for those people, we kind of have to just say, that's them. Let's move on. Like I said, there's always that small group of people who do advance, who do learn truths, who do move forward, and they drag everyone else out of the mud and out of the mire of what the world was into something new. We always have to remember it's that small percentage that's always pulling people out, right? And it's in those small people, it's the Martin Luther Kings, it's the It's those people who grab a hold and drag. So in whether it's the birth of electricity, the birth of a nation, or the discovery of Sasquatch, it's always those small dedicated few that move society very, very slowly into the light. It's very, we tend to think, oh, that happened overnight. Well, that overnight was 30, 40 years of human history. It's just, because we just see it on a piece of paper, in a history book. Like, oh, that just happened. Look at how quickly that happened. That didn't happen quickly for the people in it. There were people who lived and died for these things to happen.
Mm.
I think at the end of the day, we just have to realize we're part of a much larger fight. And maybe we don't learn everything this go around. Maybe it's the next generation that gets all this. But the next generation can't get it if we don't do the work.
Exactly. Well, we'll keep trying to do the work. And I'll definitely want you to come back again, Jason, because, we've got so much more to talk about, I think. Well, I know we have.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it tonight. So thanks for coming on.
Hey, I had a great time. Like I said, I love talking about this kind of stuff. Like I said, it's great to meet new people. Like all the great. Now again, I think probably people watching on YouTube, they're seeing it down here, but it's like for me, it's like over. Well, there we are. It's over here on my screen. I'm looking at it. I'm like, this is wonderful. It's like I get to meet new people. I love all the questions that are coming down. It's wonderful.
A lot of the questions were from someone wanting to know about the pterodactyl and where you were getting your information from, and I'm sure it's all out there, isn't it? If people want to do their own research, they'll find.
Yes, there's a lot out there. Like I said, hopefully over the next year, SIRUpapers.com is going to bring a lot more of that out there, so you can actually look and say, well, here's the here, like for the pterodactyls, right? Like, well, here's what we found. Like, here's the skeletons. Here's the impressions of their wings. Here's how we can compare and contrast what people are seeing against what we, have artifacts of. Here's the carvings, of people seeing an elastometherium. Here's what the London hammer is. Here's the chemical analysis in the London hammer that shows that dispels all of the things that people people talk about to quote unquote disprove it. Like they're like, oh, well, that was debunked. No, it wasn't. You lied about the whole thing. And then you call it debunked, right? That's the problem. We live in a world where people are willing to say, oh, that was debunked, and then I actually do the reading on it and actually see what it was that, well, how did you debunk it? Well, you lied the entire time. You didn't even begin to address it. It's like, this is profoundly stupid, but it's just what makes people comfortable. So like I said, we're going to try and put all that stuff together on that website. Until then, though, you can always hang out with us on Texas Front Porch at the Trinity Para Cryptid Research channel on YouTube.
Definitely. Kerry's just give you a shout out. Live on Monday, see you on tomorrow night.
Yes. Yeah, actually, we got a show tomorrow. I forgot to tell you Sunday. Thanks.
Who have you got on tomorrow night?
Oh, we have Shelly Montana.
Right.
Shelly coming to Montana. We've had her on before. She's a local Texan here. Great woman. She is an expert in tracking. She wouldn't call herself an expert in tracking, but if you can tell the difference between I can't tell the difference between a hog and a raccoon. So as far as I'm concerned, she's an expert. But she has some really interesting views on Sasquatch and from a physical perspective. But we're gonna push that conversation real hard. Actually, this week or tomorrow's show and the following show, we have her on 2 days. It was sort of a weird scheduling snafu, but it's going to work out for our benefit. So definitely go listen to her. She's a wonderful, wonderful person.
Yeah. It's nice to spread it out as well, isn't it? Because there's so much to talk about. You can't put it all in one. Well, we could do, but we're not going to tonight. But thank you again. And I really enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone in the chat.
Yes.
Please give us a like, share this video if you enjoyed it. And I'll see you all next week.